The stars had always been silent watchers of humanity's rise, cold and indifferent to the struggles of the small blue world that circled an unremarkable yellow sun. For millennia, humans gazed upward, wondering if they were alone, sending signals into the void, hoping for an answer that never came. When they finally ventured beyond their atmospheric cradle, they did so with the naive optimism of children taking their first steps, unaware of the predators that lurked in the cosmic darkness. The Galactic Concordat had existed for 17 million years before humanity discovered fire. It was an alliance of convenience, a carefully balanced ecosystem of species that had learned to coexist through mutual fear and economic necessity. At its heart sat the Velkari hegemony, ancient beings of crystalline consciousness who had mastered faster-than-light travel when Earth was still a molten ball of rock. They viewed younger species the way humans might view insects, useful for certain tasks perhaps, but ultimately insignificant. When human radio signals first reached Velkari listening posts, they were met with a mixture of amusement and contempt. Another primitive species, broadcasting their existence to the universe like foolish prey animals calling out to predators. The Concordat's response was standard protocol: observation, assessment, and eventual integration, willing or otherwise. First contact came in 2157, when the generation ship Endless Horizon encountered a Velkari scout vessel at the edge of the Alpha Centauri system. The humans, armed with hope and carefully prepared diplomatic protocols, transmitted greetings in 100 languages. The Velkari response was to disable the ship's engines with a single pulse of their weapons, board the vessel, and collect samples of the crew for biological analysis. 300 colonists vanished that day. The Endless Horizon drifted in the dark for 6 months before a rescue mission found it, empty save for bloodstains and the lingering scent of chemicals that would later be identified as Velkari neural suppressants. It was humanity's first lesson in galactic politics. There were no equals among the stars, only predators and prey. The decades that followed were marked by humiliation and subjugation. The Velkari claimed humanity's home system as a protectorate, extracting resources and labor while offering nothing in return but the promise that they wouldn't simply eradicate the species entirely. Other concordat races followed, each taking their piece of the prize. The Kethra demanded tribute in raw materials. The Synthesis Collective conscripted human minds for their computational networks. The Dravani used human colonists as workers in their orbital refineries, where life expectancy averaged 18 months. Humanity bent but did not break. In the shadows of oppression, something was growing. Secret research facilities hidden in asteroid belts, underground bunkers on colony moons, encrypted networks spanning the solar system. Humanity was learning, adapting, preparing. They studied every piece of alien technology they could acquire, legal or otherwise. They reverse-engineered Velkari shield harmonics, decoded Kethra propulsion systems, and dissected the neural architecture of captured collective drones. And they discovered something that their overlords had long forgotten. Technology was not the only path to power. The human mind, shaped by billions of years of evolution on a hostile world, possessed capabilities that other species had bred out of themselves millennia ago. Pattern recognition that bordered on precognition, intuitive leaps that no logical process could replicate, an adaptability that allowed them to find solutions where none should exist, and perhaps most importantly, a capacity for spite that burned hotter than any star. Project Prometheus began in 2198, 41 years after first contact. Its existence was known to fewer than 100 people, each of whom had lost family to alien exploitation. They worked in facilities that didn't officially exist, using resources that had been carefully diverted over decades, driven by a single, unwavering purpose: revenge. The project's lead scientist was Dr. Yuki Tanaka, a woman whose parents had been among the Endless Horizon victims. She had spent her entire adult life studying physics, specifically the theoretical framework underlying faster-than-light travel. What she discovered changed everything.
FTL technology, as used by the Concordat, relied on what they called dimensional anchoring, creating stable connections between points in normal space by threading pathways through higher dimensions. The process required exotic matter, rare elements, and incredibly precise calibration. A ship traveling through such a pathway was essentially borrowing structural integrity from higher dimensions, allowing it to survive the stresses of superluminal velocity.
Tanaka realized that this borrowed integrity could be revoked.
The mathematics were elegant in their simplicity. Every FTL-capable ship left a signature in dimensional space, a fingerprint that could be traced and targeted. With the right equipment, one could project a field that would collapse these dimensional anchors, stripping away the exotic properties that held alien vessels together. The ships wouldn't explode or break apart. They would simply cease to maintain coherent structure at the molecular level.
They would turn to dust. The first test was conducted in 2203 using a derelict Kethra freighter as a target. The device, roughly the size of a ground vehicle, was positioned 300 kilometers away. When activated, it produced no visible effect, no dramatic energy discharge. But the freighter, which had maintained its structural integrity for over a century, simply collapsed. Its hull fragmented into particles finer than sand, its systems dissolving into components that no longer remembered how to be a ship. The scientists watched in silence as debris spread through space like a metallic cloud. Then Dr. Tanaka spoke the words that would define humanity's future. Now we have a weapon. Construction of the defense network began immediately. Dubbed Athena's Veil, it was an interconnected system of satellites, ground stations, and orbital platforms positioned throughout human-controlled space. Each node was disguised as something mundane: a communications relay, a mining drone, a navigational beacon. Together, they formed a web capable of identifying and targeting any ship using Concordat FTL technology. The system wasn't perfect. It required enormous amounts of energy, drawn from fusion reactors hidden beneath the surfaces of moons and asteroids. Its range was limited to approximately 2 light-years from the nearest node, meaning it could only protect the core human territories. And it took time to calibrate for specific targets. Random ships couldn't be affected, only those that had been scanned and analyzed. But for any alien fleet foolish enough to enter human space without permission, it would be more than sufficient. The Velthrani noticed nothing amiss. Why would they? Humanity was a conquered species, technologically inferior, politically irrelevant. The hegemony had subjugated thousands of races over the millennia, and none had ever posed a genuine threat. Human scientists were known to be competent, useful for solving problems that didn't interest Velthrani researchers, but they lacked the fundamental understanding of dimensional physics that would allow them to threaten the established order. Or so the Velthrani believe. The catalyst for what would become known as the Dust War came in 2027, when the Velthrani primacy decided to reorganize its human holdings. Under the new policy, Earth's population would be reduced to a more manageable level through forced relocation to off-world labor colonies. The target was 8 billion humans, transferred to facilities throughout Concordat space, their homeworld repurposed as a resource extraction site. It was, by Velthrani standards, a generous offer. They could have simply sterilized the planet. The announcement was made on Unity Day, a concorded holiday celebrating the supposed harmony of member species. Velthrani Council Matrix addressed a human population through mandatory broadcast, its crystalline form shimmering with what might have been amusement. "Your species has served the Concordat adequately," Matrix said, its voice translated through neural implants that every human was required to carry. "This reorganization will allow you to serve more efficiently, in roles better suited to your capabilities. Resistance is not expected, nor will it be tolerated."
In hidden facilities throughout the solar system, Project Prometheus personnel watched the broadcast with grim satisfaction. They had known this day would come, had counted on it, in fact. The Velthrani had finally given them the provocation they needed.
Dr. Tanaka, now 73 years old, but still razor-sharp, made the call. Activate Athena's Veil. Full defensive posture. Across human space, thousands of disguised nodes came online. The web was complete. The first Velthrani fleet arrived 2 weeks later, a standard pacification force of 30 vessels led by the hegemony dreadnought Eternal Supremacy. They emerged from FTL at the edge of the solar system, transmitting demands for immediate surrender and compliance. Their weapons were charged, their boarding parties ready, their victory assumed. Admiral Chen Wei-lin, commanding the Human Defense Force from a bunker beneath the lunar surface, responded with a single phrase that would be remembered for millennia. "You are not welcome here. Leave now, and you may survive." The Velthrani console aboard Eternal Supremacy found this amusing. The transmission logs would later show that it was laughing when the fleet began to die. Athena's Veil engaged at 0847 hours, Solar Standard Time. The targeting data, compiled over decades of covert observation, was flawless. Each ship was individually calibrated, its dimensional signature analyzed and matched. The field projectors fired in perfect synchronization, invisible waves of dimensional disruption rippling through the fabric of space. For 1 second, nothing seemed to happen. Then the Eternal Supremacy, pride of the Velthrani hegemony, began to dissolve. Its hull, constructed from materials that no human foundry could have produced, simply fell apart. Not exploded, dissolved, like salt in water. The change propagated from the outer surface inward, transforming solid metal into fine particulate matter in a matter of seconds. 29 other ships suffered the same fate. 30 vessels, containing over 4,000 Velthrani warriors and crew, reduced to expanding clouds of metallic dust. The entire process took less than 10 seconds. There were no survivors. There was nothing left to survive. The silence that followed was absolute. In the bunker, Admiral Chen and her staff stared at their displays, watching the debris clouds drift through space. Somewhere behind her, someone was crying, whether from relief, horror, or joy, she couldn't tell. "Transmit," Chen ordered, her voice steady despite the trembling in her hands. "All frequencies, all concordant channels, repeat until acknowledged." The message that went out was brief. Human territory is closed. Any vessel entering without permission will be destroyed. There will be no warnings. The Concordate's response was swift and predictable. Within hours, every species in the Alliance was demanding answers. How had humans, mere humans, destroyed a Velthrani fleet? What weapon had they developed? Who had given them access to such technology? The Velthrani, for their part, refused to believe the reports. It wasn't possible. Their ships were built to withstand attacks from peer-level civilizations. No primitive species, especially not one they had so thoroughly subjugated, could have developed a countermeasure to their dimensional technology. They sent another fleet. This one was larger, 70 vessels, including 3 dreadnoughts and a carrier that housed 2,000 fighter craft. Their orders were explicit: pacify the human territories through overwhelming force, and capture enough of the species alive to determine how they had achieved this impossible victory. The fleet arrived in human space at 1432 hours, 2 days after the first attack. They emerged from FTL with weapons hot, shields at maximum, and every sensor trained on potential threats. Their commander, a Velthrani war leader named Zenthos, who had overseen the conquest of 17 species, was confident in their superiority. His last thought, as his ship began to crumble around him, was one of disbelief. Athena's Veil claimed the second fleet in 11 seconds. The dimensional disruption fields had been refined since the first engagement. Their targeting algorithms improved based on the data gathered from the initial attack. Ships died in perfect sequence, largest to smallest, their destruction choreographed with almost artistic precision.
70 vessels, over 20,000 Velthrani. Dust. This time, Admiral Chen's transmission was longer. We warned you. We will warn you again. Human space is closed. Any vessel that crosses our borders without permission, Velthrani, Kethra, collective or otherwise, will share this fate. This is not a negotiation. This is not a threat. This is a statement of fact. She paused, then added, "We remember the endless horizon. We remember everything you took from us, and we are done being your prey." The Concorded convened an emergency session, the first of its kind in over 3,000 years. Species that normally refused to acknowledge each other's existence gathered in the great chambers of the Synthesis Collective's hub world, their representatives projecting holographic forms that filled the assembly space with a riot of alien shapes. The topic of discussion was simple. What had humanity done, and how could it be stopped? The Velthrani opened with outrage. Their losses were unprecedented. No species had ever destroyed hegemony vessels so efficiently, so completely. They demanded a full military response, a combined fleet drawn from every Concordate member to crush the human rebellion once and for all. The Kethra, typically the Velthrani's most reliable allies, were more cautious. Their analysts had studied the debris fields left by the destroyed fleets, and their findings were disturbing. The ships hadn't been damaged, they had been unmade. Whatever weapon the humans possessed, it operated on principles that even Kethra science struggled to explain. The Synthesis Collective was silent, processing. They had always valued human minds for their unpredictability, their capacity for lateral thinking. Now they wondered if they had underestimated the potential of that unpredictability. Perhaps, they suggested, the Concordat should attempt diplomacy before committing to war. The Dravani, whose orbital refineries had relied heavily on human labor, argued for a measured response. A full military engagement would be costly, regardless of outcome. Better to blockade human space, cut off their resources, and wait for them to starve into submission. But the Velthrani would not be deterred. Their pride had been wounded in a way that demanded blood. They would lead the attack themselves, committing the full might of their fleet, over 2,000 vessels, including the ancient war moon that served as their mobile command center. The other Concordat species could join or stand aside, but the humans would be destroyed. The fleet that assembled at the edge of Velthrani space was the largest military force the Concordant had deployed in 10,000 years. Over 3,000 vessels, representing a dozen species, each contributing their finest warships. They carried weapons that could crack planets, shields that could withstand stellar flares, and soldiers engineered for combat through millennia of genetic optimization. Against them stood humanity's defenses, a few hundred converted mining vessels and patrol craft, crewed by people who had known anything but subjugation. By any reasonable analysis, it should have been a massacre. Admiral Chen knew this. Her staff knew this. Every human watching the approaching fleet on their displays knew this. The alien armada was so vast that their sensors couldn't track individual ships. It appeared as a solid mass of hostile contacts, a wave of destruction that would sweep away everything in its path. But Chen also knew something that the Concordant didn't. "All stations, report status," she ordered. One by one, the nodes of Athena's Veil confirmed their readiness. The network was fully operational, power reserves at maximum, targeting systems calibrated and locked. They had been preparing for this moment for over a decade. "Project Prometheus assets."
Dr. Tanaka's voice came through, calm despite the circumstances. "Online and ready. We've analyzed the approaching fleet. Every ship has been cataloged. Every dimensional signature has been mapped. We can take them all."
Chen nodded. "Then we take them all." The Concordat fleet crossed into human territory at 0600 hours on the morning of March 15, 2028.
They emerged from their final FTL jump in perfect formation, a display of military precision meant to intimidate their prey into submission. The War Moon hung at the center of the formation, its ancient weapon systems charging for what was intended to be a decisive first strike.
They never got the chance to fire.
Athena's Veil engaged at 06 hours and 7 seconds. The targeting data, compiled from years of covert observation and refined through 2 previous engagements, was comprehensive and exact. Each ship was hit with a dimensional disruption field calibrated specifically to its unique signature. There was no defense possible, no countermeasure that could be deployed. The alien vessels were simply unmade.
The dissolution began at the edges of the formation, where the smaller frigates and destroyers served as screening elements. Crews watched in horror as their ships began to crumble around them, solid decks becoming shifting sand, walls dissolving into particulate clouds. The process was not painful. There wasn't time for pain. One moment they existed, the next they were merely components of an expanding debris field.
The wave of destruction rolled inward, claiming cruisers and battleships with equal ease. Velthrani, Kethra, Collective, Dravani. The weapon made no distinction. All FTL-capable vessels were equally vulnerable, their advanced technology rendered meaningless by a force they couldn't comprehend.
The War Moon lasted longest. Its massive structure, the product of technologies so ancient that even the Velthrani had forgotten their origins, resisted the dissolution for almost 30 seconds. But in the end, it too succumbed, its continent-sized bulk fragmenting into dust that would drift through human space for centuries.
3,047 vessels, over 2 million alien soldiers and crew. The combined military might of civilizations that had dominated a galaxy for millions of years.
Dust.
The transmission that Admiral Chen sent in the aftermath was received by every species in the Concordat. It was short, but its message was clear.
Let this be understood. Human space is not a territory to be exploited. Human beings are not resources to be harvested. Any species that threatens our existence will share the fate of this fleet. We sought only to live in peace. You denied us that option. Now you will deal with the consequences.
The Concordat did not send another fleet. They didn't have one to send.
In the weeks that followed, the political landscape of the galaxy shifted in ways that hadn't been seen since the Velthrani first rose to prominence. Smaller species, long oppressed by the major powers, began to look to humanity as a potential ally. Rumors spread of other civilizations developing similar technologies, using human research as a foundation. The old order was crumbling, and no one knew what would replace it. The Velthrani, for the first time in their ancient history, faced extinction not through conquest, but through irrelevance. Their military might had been the foundation of their political power, and now that foundation was dust, literally. Other concordant species that had supported them out of fear no longer had reason to do so. Some began quietly reaching out to humanity, seeking trade agreements and mutual defense pacts. Dr. Tanaka, now hailed as the savior of her species, gave only one public interview after the battle. When asked how she felt about the millions of lives ended by her creation, she was silent for a long moment before responding.
I feel nothing, she said finally. Nothing but satisfaction. My parents died on the endless horizon when I was 3 years old. For 50 years, I watched my species be enslaved, exploited, and treated as less than animals. Every night, I dreamed of finding a way to make them pay. And now I have. She paused, her eyes meeting the camera with an intensity that would be remembered for generations. Let the galaxy understand this. We did not start this war. We asked only to be left alone, to find our place among the stars in peace. They denied us. They took our people, stole our resources, and treated us as cattle to be managed. And when we finally found a way to defend ourselves, they came with armies to destroy us.
They found dust.
And if anyone else wishes to try their luck, they will find the same.
The human expansion, as historians would later call it, began not with conquest, but with liberation. Worlds that had been concordate labor colonies found themselves suddenly free as human fleets, now protected by mobile Athena's Veil installations, swept through former concordate space. Species that had been subjugated for millennia looked to humanity not as fellow victims, but as saviors. It was not a role that humanity had sought, but it was one they accepted.
The Confederacy of Free Peoples was established in 2025, a voluntary alliance of species that had suffered under concordat rule. Humanity served as its military backbone, their Athena's Veil technology shared with allies who had proven their trustworthiness. For the first time in galactic history, there existed a power structure not based on domination and exploitation, but on mutual benefit and shared defense.
The Velkari, reduced to a shadow of their former power, retreated to their core worlds and sealed their borders. They would emerge occasionally over the following centuries, attempting to reclaim their former glory, but each attempt ended the same way. Their fleets crossed into Confederacy space, their fleets turned to dust.
Eventually, they stopped trying. The Synthesis Collective, ever practical, became one of the Confederacy's first members. They had always valued efficiency, and continuing to oppose humanity was clearly inefficient. In exchange for their knowledge and computational resources, they received protection and access to the FTL disruption technology that they themselves began to develop applications for.
The Kethra fractured into factions, some joining the Confederacy, others attempting to carve out independent territories, and a few trying to maintain the old ways of concorded dominance. These last were swiftly dealt with, their fleets meeting the same fate as their Velkari masters. The Dravani, lacking the military capability to resist and having no interest in continued conflict, sought integration into the Confederacy early. They were accepted, though their treatment of human laborers in their orbital refineries was not forgotten. Reparations were required and delivered.
Throughout the galaxy, species began to speak of humanity with a mixture of awe and fear. They had done what no one had thought possible, risen from subjugation to dominance in barely a century. Their technology was mysterious, their intentions unclear, and their capacity for violence utterly unprecedented.
But what truly unsettled the older races was something subtler. It wasn't that humanity had developed a weapon capable of destroying any fleet. It was that they had done so while appearing to be a conquered species, their research hidden in plain sight, their preparations invisible to observers who thought they knew everything worth knowing.
What else might they be hiding? What other surprises awaited those who dared to threaten them?
No one was eager to find out. In the end, the Dust War was not won through superior numbers or ancient technology. It was won through something that the Concordant had never considered a factor: the human capacity for patient, focused hatred. For 50 years, humanity had endured enslavement, loss, and humiliation. For 50 years, they had smiled and nodded and done what they were told, while secretly preparing for the day when they could strike back.
When that day came, they held nothing back.
Admiral Chen retired from military service in 2020, passing command of humanity's fleets to a new generation of officers who had never known life under concordant rule. At her retirement ceremony, she was asked what legacy she hoped to leave behind.
"I hope," she said, "that no human ever has to feel what I felt when I watched those fleets approach our home. The fear, the helplessness, the knowledge that we might be witnessing the end of everything we loved."
She looked out at the gathered officers, men and women who had grown up knowing only freedom and strength.
You will never know that feeling. That is my legacy. That is what we fought for. Not conquest, not revenge. Safety, security. The knowledge that when someone threatens us, we have the power to make them dust.
The room was silent for a moment. Then someone began to applaud, and the rest joined in, the sound building until it filled the chamber like thunder. Humanity had been tested by the universe's oldest predators.
They had been found not wanting, but waiting for the chance to show what they were truly capable of. The stars, which had watched humanity's rise with cold indifference, now watched with something else.
Perhaps it was respect. Perhaps it was fear.
Perhaps, in the end, it was both. The centuries that followed saw humanity consolidate their position as the galaxy's preeminent power, not through conquest, but through the simple fact that no one dared challenge them. The Athena's Veil technology continued to evolve, each generation of scientists building on Dr. Tanaka's original breakthrough to create systems that were ever more powerful and precise.
But the true revolution was not technological. It was philosophical.
For millennia, galactic civilization had been built on the assumption that might made right, that the strong could do as they pleased with the weak, and that this was simply the natural order of things. Humanity's rise shattered that assumption. A species that had been weak, that had been prey, had found a way to become the apex predator of the galaxy.
If they could do it, so could others. The Confederacy became not just an alliance, but an ideology. Its members subscribed to a simple principle: no species would ever again be treated as humanity had been treated. The labor colonies were dismantled. The neural conscription programs were ended. The resource extraction operations that had drained worlds of their wealth were shut down.
In their place arose a new order, based on trade and cooperation rather than exploitation and force. It wasn't perfect, no political system ever is, but it was better than what had come before. Billions of beings who had known only servitude found themselves free for the first time in their species' existence.
And through it all, humanity's fleets patrolled the void, their weapons silent but ready. The message was clear. This peace was not born of weakness, but of strength. It would be maintained by strength. And anyone who sought to disturb it would face the same fate as the Concordate's armada.
Dr. Yuki Tanaka died in 2234 at the age of 103. Her funeral was attended by representatives of every Confederacy species, as well as delegations from civilizations that had once been humanity's oppressors. She was buried on Earth in a cemetery that overlooked the ocean where her parents had grown up.
Her epitaph, chosen by her family, was simple.
She remembered, she prepared, she prevailed.
The monument erected in her honor stood twice as tall, built from a composite of metals that had been part of Velkari warships. At its base, an inscription in dozens of languages conveyed a longer message.
In 2157, humanity discovered that they were not alone in the universe. In 2027, humanity discovered that they would never again be victims. The 50 years between were paid for in blood, sweat, and tears. Let no one forget the cost. Let no one forget the lesson. Let no one forget that even the smallest species can shake the stars if given sufficient cause.
The Velkari, from their isolated core worlds, sent no representative to the funeral. But in their crystalline archives, preserved for eternity, was a new entry in the records of sentient species. The entry for humanity had been revised. Where once it had read, Class 7 pre-spacefaring species, suitable for labor conscription and resource extraction, minimal threat potential. It now read, Class 1 apex species, technological capabilities exceed known parameters. Psychological profile indicates extreme capacity for long-term planning and deferred aggression. Under no circumstances should this species be provoked. Recommend total avoidance of contact pending further study. Beneath this assessment was a single note, added by the last Velkari to hold the title of consul.
We made them what they are. We must live with the consequences.
The galaxy had changed, and there was no going back. 200 years after the Dust War, humanity encountered the Traversers. They were not like any species previously known, not biological, not synthetic, but something in between, entities that existed partially in dimensions that even Athena's veil could barely detect. They had crossed the vast emptiness between galaxies, drawn by the strange energy signatures that humanity's dimensional technology produced. Their first message, translated through means that no one could quite explain, was simple. "We observed your kind from afar. We saw what you did to those who threatened you. We are impressed." Admiral Helena Torres, commanding the Confederacy fleet that made first contact, responded with cautious formality. "We defend ourselves when necessary. We seek peaceful relations with all species that respect our sovereignty." The Traverser's reply carried what might have been amusement. "We have traveled between galaxies for longer than your stars have burned. We have seen civilizations rise and fall, species evolve and vanish, empires stretch across galactic arms, only to crumble into nothing. In all that time, we have rarely encountered a species that managed to weaponize dimensional physics so elegantly." There was a pause, then, "Your technology interests us. Your psychology interests us more. Most species, when pressed to the point you were pressed, simply die. You chose another path. We would know more about how and why." The negotiations that followed lasted 3 decades, but they ultimately resulted in something unprecedented, an exchange of knowledge between species separated by intergalactic distances. The Traversers shared insights into dimensional physics that advanced human technology by centuries. In return, they received something they valued far more: stories. It turned out that the Traversers, for all their age and power, were collectors of narratives. They had witnessed the rise and fall of millions of species, but they had rarely found stories as compelling as humanity's. A species that had clawed its way from prey to predator, that had turned its own subjugation into fuel for transcendence. This was rare. This was valuable. They recorded everything. Every human myth and legend, every historical account, every work of fiction that dealt with the themes of survival and revenge. They were particularly fascinated by the concept of spite, the willingness to suffer in order to make an enemy suffer more. It was, they said, almost unique to humanity. Other species develop vengeance, one Traveser explained during a cultural exchange session. They understand the desire to harm those who have harmed them, but spite, the willingness to sacrifice your own interests solely to deny satisfaction to an enemy, this is unusual. It suggests a psychological architecture fundamentally different from anything we have previously encountered. The human representative, a historian named Dr. Marcus Okafor, shrugged. "We call it cutting off your nose to spite your face. It's not considered our finest trait." "Perhaps not," the Traveser replied. "But it may be the trait that saved your species. The Velthrani could not understand why you continued to resist when resistance offered no logical benefit. They did not realize that you were willing to burn with them if it meant they would burn." "We prefer not to burn at all," Dr. Okafor said. "Yet you were willing to. That is the point. That willingness, the absolute refusal to submit, regardless of cost, is what made your eventual victory possible. Without it, you would have accepted your role as a subject species. You would have adapted, survived, perhaps even thrived within the system that oppressed you. Instead, you chose to destroy the system entirely." The Travis's form shifted, colors rippling across its semi-physical surface. "We have seen this pattern before, but rarely. Species with this trait either achieve transcendence or destroy themselves. There is no middle ground." "And which do you think will achieve?" Dr. Okafor asked. "That remains to be seen, but we are watching. We are always watching." The Traversers departed after 50 years, returning to whatever distant galaxy they called home. They left behind knowledge that would take humanity centuries to fully understand, as well as something else, a warning. "There are others like us," they said in their final transmission. "Entities that travel between galaxies, drawn by signals that most species cannot detect. Not all of them are as peaceful as we. Your technology,
impressive as it is, operates only within this galaxy. Beyond its edge, you are as vulnerable as any other species.
We recommend you address this limitation. The universe is vast, and not all who dwell in it will be impressed by your survival. Some will see you as a threat to be eliminated before you can grow any stronger. The message ended with coordinates, locations where, according to the Traversers, humanity might find the resources and knowledge needed to defend against threats from beyond the galaxy. It was a gift, but also a challenge.
Humanity accepted both.
The Extragalactic Defense Initiative launched in 2489, 2 centuries after the Traversers' departure. Its goal was simple: ensure that humanity would never again face an existential threat without the means to respond. The technology developed under Project Prometheus had given them dominion over their galaxy. Now they would extend that dominion beyond its borders.
The research was slow. Extragalactic distances introduced complications that even dimensional physics struggled to address. Energy requirements grew exponentially. Targeting accuracy decreased by orders of magnitude. The elegant weapons that had turned concordant fleets to dust were barely adequate for intergalactic defense.
But humanity was patient. They had learned patience under the Concordat's yoke, when any premature action would have resulted in their extinction. They could wait centuries more if necessary.
And in the meantime, they continued to build.
The galaxy of 2600 was almost unrecognizable from the one humanity had first entered as frightened colonists. The Confederacy had grown to encompass over 1,000 species, united by trade, diplomacy, and the shared understanding that humanity's protection extended to all members. Conflict still occurred, they always would, but they were resolved through negotiation rather than warfare.
The Velkari remained in isolation, their core world sealed behind barriers that no one had bothered to penetrate. They were no longer a threat, merely a historical curiosity, a reminder of what the galaxy had once been and would never be again.
Other former Concordat powers had found new roles in the post-war order. The Synthesis Collective served as the Confederacy's primary computational infrastructure, their vast processing networks handling the logistics of intergalactic governance. The Kethra, now divided into a dozen independent polities, competed for influence through economic rather than military means.
The Dravani had transformed themselves into the galaxy's premier cultural archivists, perhaps seeking redemption for their historical crimes through preservation of knowledge. And humanity? Humanity was everywhere.
Human colonies dotted every arm of the galaxy. Human ships carried goods and passengers to ports that would once have shot them on sight. Human diplomats mediated disputes between species that had warred for millennia. Human scientists collaborated with alien researchers on projects that pushed the boundaries of possibility.
But humanity never forgot.
Every human child learned the history of the Concordat years. They studied the endless horizon, memorized the names of the victims, understood what their ancestors had endured. They visited the memorial sites, the debris fields where alien fleets had become dust, the former labor colonies, now converted to remembrance parks, the underground facilities where Project Prometheus had been born. And they learned the lesson that those years had taught. Be prepared. Always be prepared. Because the universe is full of predators, and the only way to avoid becoming prey is to be the most dangerous thing in sight. The Athena's Veil network expanded continuously, its reach now extending to the farthest reaches of the galaxy. New nodes were constructed every year, each one adding to the web of protection that surrounded human space. The technology improved, becoming more efficient, more precise, more deadly. And in secret facilities that even most government officials didn't know existed, research continued on the next generation of defenses. The Traversers had warned of threats from beyond the galaxy. Humanity intended to be ready.
In 2750, they were tested again.
The entities that arrived from the void between galaxies had no name that human languages could reproduce.
They communicated through gravitational waves, their thoughts rippling through space-time in patterns that took years to decode. When understanding finally came, it brought with it a demand.
Submit or be destroyed. The entities, whom human scientists eventually dubbed the Heralds, were not like the Traversers. They were not curious or benevolent. They were harvesters, drifting between galaxies to collect the energy and matter of civilizations that had grown beyond a certain threshold. In their view, intelligent species were merely resources to be exploited, no different from the stars they consumed.
They had detected humanity's dimensional technology from intergalactic distances and recognized it as evidence of a civilization worth harvesting. Their fleet, if the term could be applied to beings that existed partially outside normal space, was already approaching.
The Confederacy's response was immediate and unified. For the first time since the Dust War, every member species mobilized for defense. Fleets that had grown complacent in centuries of peace suddenly found purpose again. Research programs that had been pursuing theoretical goals shifted to practical applications.
And at the heart of it all, humanity led the way.
Admiral Christina Chen, a direct descendant of Wei Lin Chen, still bearing the family's tradition of service, took command of the Combined Defense Force. She was 90 years old, having spent her entire life preparing for a moment like this. When she addressed the fleet, her words echoed those of her ancestor. They come expecting easy prey. They will find something different. They will find the descendants of those who turned the Concordat to dust. They will find a civilization that does not know how to surrender.
She paused, her eyes sweeping across the assembled commanders, Human, Collective, Kethra, Dravani, and dozens of others. They will find us, and they will regret it. The battle that followed lasted 6 years.
The Heralds were unlike any enemy humanity had faced. They existed partially outside normal space, making them resistant to conventional dimensional weapons. Their technology was millions of years more advanced, their resources drawn from thousands of consumed galaxies. They could not be defeated through simple force.
But they could be outsmarted.
Humanity's greatest advantage had never been their technology. It was their minds. Those pattern-recognizing, intuition-driven, spite-fueled minds that had allowed them to survive the Concordat and thrive in its aftermath. Now those minds turned to the problem of the Heralds, analyzing their behavior, identifying their weaknesses, developing strategies that no logical process would have predicted.
The breakthrough came in the 4th year of the war, when a junior researcher named Imara Okafor, descendant of the same Dr. Marcus Okafor who had conversed with the Traversers, made a crucial observation. The Heralds weren't truly alive in any biological sense. They were patterns, self-sustaining information structures that propagated through dimensions humanity was only beginning to understand. And patterns could be disrupted.
Project Prometheus had originally been designed to collapse dimensional anchors, stripping away the exotic properties that held FTL-capable ships together. Imara's insight was that the same principle could be applied to the Heralds themselves. Their existence depended on maintaining coherent information structures across multiple dimensions. If those structures could be fragmented, if the patterns that made them alive could be broken, then they would simply cease to exist.
The technology took 2 more years to develop. During that time, humanity held the line, sacrificing ships and lives to buy the researchers time they needed. The Heralds penetrated deep into the galaxy, consuming 3 minor systems before being driven back. The losses were terrible, millions dead, centuries of development erased.
But humanity did not surrender. They never surrendered.
In 2756, the new weapon was deployed for the first time. Dr. Imara Okafor, now leading the project her ancestor had inspired, personally activated the device from a bunker at the galaxy's core. The effect propagated through dimensions that human senses couldn't perceive, touching every Herald presence within range.
The Heralds did not dissolve into dust, they simply stopped.
The patterns that maintained their existence unraveled, their information structures fragmenting into meaningless noise. What had been beings of vast intelligence and ancient power became nothing, not dead because they had never been alive in the conventional sense, but absent as if they had never existed at all. The surviving heralds fled, withdrawing from the galaxy at speeds that suggested genuine fear. They did not return.
In the aftermath, the Confederacy declared victory, but the celebrations were muted. The war had cost too much for triumphalism. But there was satisfaction, the grim, determined satisfaction of those who had faced annihilation and found a way to survive.
Admiral Chen, speaking at the memorial for the fallen, invoked the words of her ancestor once more.
We did not seek this war. We did not desire conquest or glory. We wished only to live in peace, to explore the universe, to grow and learn and become something greater than we were. But when they came to destroy us, we defended ourselves. When they sought to harvest us like cattle, we showed them the cost of such arrogance.
She looked up at the stars, visible even through the ceiling of the memorial chamber, through sophisticated projection technology. Let the universe know, humanity is not prey. We were never prey. We were simply waiting for the right moment to prove it. The 1,000 years that followed were known as the Great Flowering, an era of unprecedented growth, discovery, and cultural achievement. The threat of the heralds had unified the galaxy as nothing before, and that unity persisted even after the danger passed. Humanity's role evolved from protector to partner, their military dominance giving way to a more balanced relationship with other species. The lessons of the Concordate era had not been forgotten. Humanity would never again accept subjugation, but the need to maintain absolute superiority faded as trust developed between former enemies. The technology that had saved the galaxy was shared, carefully and with extensive safeguards, with species that had proven their commitment to the Confederacy's ideals. A new defensive network, incorporating both the original Athena's Veil systems and the Herald disrupting technology, protected not just human space, but the entire galaxy. Other galaxies began reaching out, drawn by the signals of a civilization that had defeated an enemy thought to be invincible. Some were hostile, and those were dealt with accordingly. Others were potential allies, and with them humanity built relationships that spanned intergalactic distances.
The Traversers returned once, briefly, to observe what humanity had become. Their assessment was characteristically cryptic.
You are no longer the same species that we met. You have changed, grown, transcended limitations that once defined you. And yet, at your core, you remain what you were: survivors, fighters, beings who refuse to accept the universe's cruelty as inevitable.
They paused, their forms shimmering with colors that had no names in any human language.
We have watched civilizations rise and fall for eons beyond counting. Most follow predictable patterns: growth, stagnation, decline, extinction. You have broken the pattern. You have become something new.
What do you think we've become? Asked the human representative, a philosopher named Dr. Yuki Chen, who had chosen her name to honor the scientist who had started everything.
That, the Traveser replied, is for you to decide. But we would suggest this: do not forget where you came from. Do not forget the darkness from which you emerged. It is that memory, that burning, defiant memory, that has made you what you are.
We won't forget, Dr. Chen promised. We never forget.
In 3500, humanity celebrated the 1000th anniversary of the Great Flowering with a ceremony attended by representatives of over 3,000 species. The event was held on Earth, restored to ecological perfection after centuries of repair, in the very cemetery where Dr. Yuki Tanaka had been laid to rest over a millennium before.
The speech given by humanity's speaker, a role that had evolved from the old political offices into something closer to a philosophical position, was brief,
1,000 years ago, our ancestors faced the heralds and prevailed. 300 years before that, they faced the concordat and prevailed. And 300 years before that, they took their first steps into a universe that seemed vast and hostile and indifferent to their survival.
We survived. We prevailed. Not because we were the strongest or the smartest or the most technologically advanced. We survived because we refused to accept extinction as an option. Because when the universe tried to crush us, we found a way to push back.
That is our legacy. That is what we pass on to those who come after. Not our technology or our achievements or our power, but our defiance. Our absolute refusal to surrender to forces greater than ourselves. The speaker paused, looking out at the assembled multitudes, human and alien, organic and synthetic, beings from across the galaxy and beyond.
They told us we were prey. We became predators. They told us we were nothing. We became everything. And if the universe sends new threats, new dangers, new enemies who believe they can destroy us, they will find what their predecessors found. Dust. The applause lasted for hours, and across the galaxy, in memorial sites and museums and archives, the stories of humanity's rise were retold once more. Tales of suffering and perseverance, of hatred channeled into purpose, of a species that had taken the worst the universe could offer and transformed it into something extraordinary. In her grave on Earth, Dr. Yuki Tanaka's epitaph remained unchanged. She remembered, she prepared, she prevailed. It could have been humanity's epitaph as well. But humanity was not finished. They never would be. The universe was vast and full of wonders, and humanity intended to see them all. And if anything tried to stop them, they would find dust, as they always had, as they always would. For humanity remembered, humanity prepared, humanity prevailed.